All right. Hello, everyone. I am Doug Bletcher, and welcome to Bridges and Rainbows, a panel discussion on how to be a better ally to autistic individuals who identify as LGBTQ. This panel was brought to you by a subcommittee that I'm a part of from the Cuyahoga County Advisory Committee. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our other subcommittee members, because without them, this wouldn't be possible. So a special thank you to Amy Clausen, Lori Kowalski, Stephen Kyman, Janice Phillips, Sarah Stamel, and Al Wilson. So beyond the subcommittee, I'm the founder of Autism Personal Coach. We provide coaching to autistic people to reduce their daily overwhelm in order to get their needs met and desires fulfilled. So along the way, many of our clients are not only autistic, but are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And as a result of our clients being part of both of these communities, this has led us to a collaboration with the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland to create a group called Spectrum Saturdays in 2018. So Spectrum Saturdays is a group that meets once a month for those on the intersections of the autistic and LGBTQ community, and where the seeds from that group planted created this event today. So the LGBT Community Center has sponsored this event, which has allowed the panelists to be paid for their participation. And I want to mention this because this is particularly meaningful, because so often on panel discussions like this, autistic people are not paid for their valuable time and insight. And there are lots of excuses I hear for this. And I think rarely the case that these are valid reasons. So I would just hope that this event would be an example that if you're going to have autistic people on a panel, that you can and should pay them for their expertise. So before we get to the panel discussion, we definitely want to thank all of you for attending this important event. Your participation demonstrates a shared value with the event host and panelists to advocate for and eliminate the barriers experienced by the autistic community who also identify as LGBTQ+. So a couple of things of note. The first is that this event's being recorded and will be sent to all registrants by email for later viewing. The second thing is we've disabled the chat and Q&A features to allow the focus to remain on our panelists as they share their lived experiences. We will be sending a survey following the event that will have an area to leave comments or to possibly ask any questions. So now we're ready for the main event for our panel discussion. So to start out, we want to get to know the panelists a little bit. So can each of the panelists tell us your name, pronouns, and the identities that would describe you?
I'll start us off here. My name is Alex. I use they, them pronouns and increasingly he, him pronouns. I'm autistic, I'm disabled, chronically ill, and I'm a writer, and I write about all of those identities and being trans, non-binary, demi-boy as well.
And I want to just jump in real quickly before we get to the next panelist. As Alex mentioned, being a writer, and Alex has a fantastic blog, autisticallyalex.com, .org, Alex? I would forget.
.com.
.com. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bernard. I'm a writer and editor. My pronouns are they, them, there. And I identify as non-binary and asexual, and I also identify as neurodivergent. I'm autistic and ADHD and dyscalculic. And I'm brunette, and my pronouns are they, them. I'm non-binary, agender, and asexual, and neurodivergent. So I'm autistic and ADHD. Yeah.
My name is Samantha Ponder. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as transgender, autistic, and generally neurodivergent. That's it.
I'll be using mostly AAC today.
Okay.
Cedar Storm. My pronouns are Z, Zir. I am transgender, non-binary, queer, asexual. I am also autistic, chronically ill, and disabled.
Thank you, Zeke. So this event is about you as the panelists educating professionals and other allies how to best support the autistic LGBTQ community. Can you give an example of a positive experience you had with a professional, and what did this person do that was helpful to you? Why don't we start with Alex?
Yeah, so in terms of like day-to-day general care, I love my current PCP, Dr. Laura Mintz at Metro Pride. It really feels like she's a partner in my health, which is really helpful to me because I have a lot of experience of having autonomy taken away from me with my health. And she's always available to answer follow-up questions and reassuring about high support need days. And then in terms of like, not just like the PCP care, I just had a really excellent experience at OSU for a top surgery consultation. They let me know like generally what was going to happen throughout the appointment. And then after the initial exam, they then like left the room and let me get dressed before we continued to talk. And like sensory wise and just like being trans, like that was really, it's such a simple thing, but it meant a lot and it made me feel comfortable. And then I really liked that the doctor also wrote out like the information as he was talking and the next steps so that I could like have that with me. So anything where simple things can help me remember is really helpful.
Samantha, what about you?
For me, I feel like my standards are different just because I've spent years sort of sifting through various doctors, therapists, and other providers that understand me and that don't. So for me, it's less about specific impactful memories and just down to little general details in treatment. Like, for example, I have a therapist who very frequently asks when I go in person if I want to dim the lights or like recognizing that like how long I tend to last in appointments before I get exhausted, or offering to do appointments in text, things like that. I think that in general, it's really important for providers to keep an open mind and be willing to learn about you. But I mean, that is also a core part of the job and a bit of a minimum for a healthy relationship with the person you work with. I think that it's really easy for people to get caught up in something I call neurocentrism, which is the tendency to judge someone based on the standards of your own neurology. I think of that it's very analogous to culture, and that like you have to accommodate for differences in neurology in much the same way that you would accommodate for culture. Being aware of that makes it easier to be proactive in your care, which is the mark of someone who's really, really special and it's worth keeping.
Bernard?
So I can only think of two people who have been helpful, and they were like, one was a therapist who I was saw for several years, and another was a primary care who I saw for several years, but I haven't seen them both in maybe a year and some time. But both of them were like, when I said I was non-binary, when I said I was asexual, like I remember when I was saying I was asexual, asking my therapist, is that real? Even though I knew it was real, it was just the way I phrased it at the time. And she said yes. But it was the only person there, medical person that I felt comfortable saying that to. All the other ones they were more interested in teaching than listening. And so I think the main thing is people who are willing to listen and to collaborate rather than teach me. I had a primary care who is very interested in collaborating with me, even though obviously I don't really know anything about the body, but I know how I experienced my body. And he was very interested in that. But that's the main thing, is just willing to have a conversation and to listen to me, especially when I talk about autism.
Burnett?
Yeah, I can only think of one therapist who has been helpful to me. It's a therapist I'm still seeing now. I started seeing this year. Her name's Dr. Manpreet, and she's in India, so I see her over Zoom. And it's the fact that she's neurodivergent, and so it's her lack of neurocentrism, which is just akin to ethnocentrism, wherein she's able to see outside of just the neurotypical view of things. So I was seeing neurotypical therapists, and they were able to help me manage symptoms related to anxiety and PTSD, but not able to help me understand myself or why I'm experiencing these things. And it's because they just couldn't see outside of their own neurotype. And so she's been really helpful with that. And with psychological assessments, helping me figure out just different parts of my personality that I'm not aware of, that I can, that might be harming me because I'm not paying attention to them, or it can help me if I can pay attention to them and bring out those sides of me. And also, she just recently discovered that she was autistic, I think within the past few weeks. So I think that explains a lot about why she was able to help me go beyond managing symptoms and actually understanding myself.
Zeke?
My coach is really good at reminding me that he believes what I'm saying. I'm so used to having to explain and justify my identities, support needs, and capabilities that doing so can be automatic, but also very draining. My coach believes me when I say something and gives me agency to decide how much support I need, how much information I share with strangers, etc. And he is respectful of these things change with time.
So language matters for lots of different reasons. And one of the reasons is to show respect and validation of who you are as a human being. What has been some language that you've heard from professionals in regards to using with you that made you personally feel uncomfortable, and how did that affect your care? How about we start with you, Zeke?
I have been called very high functioning to deny accommodations I needed to be able to advocate for myself in a hospital setting, such as dimmer lights, doctors only talking to me while not doing other things to my body, like putting in IVs, and as quiet a setting as can be provided. I have also been called low functioning during times of stress in medical situations, causing me to be denied the agency to speak for myself, even if through AAC, unless the person who came to the hospital or appointment with me pushed hard for my ability to speak for myself.
And Bernard?
Yeah, quite recently, I have several like ER and specialist visits for like injuries I've had, and it was like a neurologist recently told me was trying to teach me about stimming and said you can stop doing that if you want, and then orthopedist said something similar, and then I tried to talk to them about stimming, and they just told me that they talked over me, wanted me to be quiet. So using this like the deficit language to to talk about autism when really they're describing autism incorrectly, often through stereotypes, and they're describing it from the outside, which is actually really bizarre because I'm autistic and I'm experiencing it from the inside. So I don't understand. So, but they're telling me what I'm saying is incorrect, and they're trying to teach me about it. But they're not even. But they're talk. But they. I don't know. So like talking to me as if there's something wrong with me. Talking to me, and like I said before, teaching rather than listening, rather than learning from me. So then just constantly teaching me about myself when I'm already, I spent 35 years experiencing myself as autistic, and I spent a lot of time researching and writing about it. So yeah, that deficit language described me from the outside, and also recently I had some paramedics refer to me as she, and I'm not sure what that was about. But yeah, I'm just mainly, I find it frustrating when people identify me and then tell me that's who I am, and will not allow me any room to explain.
Burnett?
I, I'm thinking back to what I mentioned before about the neurocentrism and the therapist I was seeing for a while, trying to understand my PTSD and anxiety, and then just general confusion about the neurotypical world. And they can help me manage my symptoms to a certain extent, but then not able to help me understand things. So when I would try to explain to them that it's because I'm autistic and communication differences, but this is before I was considering seeking out a diagnosis and trying to get information from them, seeing what they think about that. But their responses would be, but autism is just social and you socialize just fine, or you're very intelligent, you have a job. And they would sometimes say, I'm not trying to discourage you from seeking out other types of therapy, but why waste your time? You're feeling better, and that it might be like a. So I got discouraged from seeking out diagnoses, and then that's also when I started to become suspicious that no one in the medical community probably really just didn't understand autism, and they weren't well, people just weren't admitting that.
Alex?
Yeah, I immediately thought of my teen years when I read this question because I wasn't diagnosed yet, and I was having a lot of chronic pain and fatigue from like age 12 or so onward. And I got a lot of like at school or at doctors or wherever, like hypochondriac or sensitive or attention seeking or whatever, just like dismissed a lot, invalidated. Either it's just growing pains or like you don't look like you're in that much pain or like all of that stuff. And I don't know, I guess I would just encourage people to look a little deeper sometimes because it's had really catastrophic consequences on like almost gaslighting myself. I automatically mask pain and nausea and like fatigue. I push way past my limits because I feel I have to like prove something. It's just like catastrophic. Like it's lasted this long until I'm 31. So the invalidation is really damaging.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about language that clearly you didn't feel comfortable with. What suggestions would you have for those professionals? Instead, what language could they use instead of what they were using? Start with you, Zeke. Zeke, unmute yourself. Okay. Maybe move on to the next person, then maybe come back to Zeke. How about Bernard? What suggestions would you have in terms of language?
That actually happened to me, which I think was happening to Zeke, but I can't remember what I did. It happened when I came in. So I like when people ask me my pronouns, but then stick to them. I think it's weird when people ask me my pronouns and then continue calling me she. I mean he. One person, someone called me she, and that was weird, but multiple times. But when they say what is your pronouns, I say they them, and then they keep going to he. I don't understand that at all. It just seems like a performance. They don't really care. And then autism and neurodivergence. When I talk about it, that starting like. Well, even if I don't say I'm autistic, people treat me like there's something wrong with me. But then when I say I'm autistic, they either start trying to pity me, or they start pretending I didn't say it, or but often if they're medical professionals, they start teaching me about it. I wish they would just ask me. I mean, it's perfectly fine to ask someone how they prefer to be talked about, and then I tell them, and then they can just do that. But I prefer people to just say that to say autistic, to not pathologize it, just to treat me like a person.
And Burnett?
I would prefer for people to acknowledge their ignorance, because it's not like anyone goes to healthcare professionals expecting them to already know everything. So it would be very helpful if they acknowledge their ignorance instead of unintentionally gaslighting us. Because I've experienced what Alex experienced, and still am working through the cognitive dissonance that I've kind of caused myself, maybe because I listened to people who were unintentionally gaslighting me, telling me what I was saying wasn't right or true. And I found it a good general practitioner that I stick with, because it's taken me a long time to find someone who listens and acknowledges their ignorance. But yeah, acknowledge the fact that not only that you might not understand something, but that I might understand something. I have lived experience and I've done research. And that also your refusal to acknowledge your ignorance or listen to me is actually causing damage to me. So yeah.
Alex?
Do we want to go back to Zeke first?
Sure, we can go to Zeke first. Go ahead, Zeke.
I would prefer they state what accommodations they cannot provide and why, rather than guessing at my functioning level or support needs level. And I would prefer they take my support person's word for it when we say that certain accommodations that they are able to provide without drastically affecting their operations, like dimming the lights when they're not working on medical procedures, would help me communicate and self-regulate better.
Alex?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what other people have already said. I really appreciate when someone is willing to say, like, I'm not sure what this is, or like, we need to look into this more, or like, I don't know, but I can send you to a specialist, or like, just admitting that they're not sure. And I also really like when people see me as a partner in caring for my body and asking what I need and what I like, where I'm at, like, am I at the end of my rope, am I hanging in there and whatever. So like validation rather than I guess unintentional, I hope unintentional gaslighting. So I agree.
Yeah.
So all of the studies I've read about the autistic LGBTQ community talks about how so often physical healthcare needs of the community are not met. What have been some challenges for you in getting your physical healthcare needs met? We'll start with Samantha.
I actually got out of a pretty nasty case of this just a few months ago. A family member who I am no longer associated with put me on an insurance under my dead name, my dead gender, and all sorts of legally false information. And there was a period of time where my primary insurance would not cover a lot of my medical expenses or would give me pushback on it because they saw I had that other insurance. And trying to get all of that resolved was kind of a mess. It involved a lot of calls, a lot of emails, and then the last person we ended up contacting was able to just fix it in a matter of days, which go figure. Anyway, like that took 2 years. I think I mentioned that, but obviously, I'm sure the way I describe it sounds very frustrating through a neurotypical lens, but for someone like me, communication is a very big barrier. Phone calls are exhausting. Email can be exhausting. And a big need that I have is the ability to have some degree of control over how I communicate. And a lot of times I get refused that, where I specifically ask, hey, can we discuss this through email? And then they say, yeah.
Did we lose? Maybe Sam got frozen. Maybe we can go back to Sam. Alex?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to look at like the intersection of marginalized identities. Like so many of us are chronically ill, LGBT, can't drive, are unemployed or underemployed. And a lot of us have a lot of trauma, medical or otherwise. So I think that's a big part. And then I think that like fluctuation in abilities and masking abilities is a big barrier because like other people have said throughout this whole panel is like, you know, I was assumed to be low functioning, I was assumed to be high functioning and all of that, when like that's a huge barrier to the care that we actually need. And it just ends up being such a mess. And then, you know, adding on top of that, like trans related care, like, oh my gosh, it's a nightmare. It really can be needlessly complicated and invalidating.
Sam, I know you froze for a second. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that question?
No, I had pretty much finished.
Okay. Zeke?
This is the challenges in healthcare one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Regarding transgender care and being autistic, I have difficulty putting events in my life on the timeline and articulating my feelings. But I have been consistently insisting that I have the same gender identity and relatively the same transition goals to my doctor's office for 7 years. Luckily, I have a doctor now who understands autism and is able to phrase questions about my gender in a way that makes sense to me when she sees that I'm not clicking with the traditional gender questions. More importantly, she believes that I have the ability to know myself, even if I can't always put it into flowy words, and she doesn't deny me treatment on the basis of my disability.
Bernard?
In trouble unmuted?
Yeah. Bernard, I think you need to unmute yourself. It's like they're having the same trouble before that you have it, Zeke.
Yeah. I think they mentioned actually that they had that same trouble at the start of the call too.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to mute myself again.
Oh, there you go.
Do you
Okay.
hear? Okay, you hear? Okay.
Yes. Okay.
So yeah, the screen is kind of blurry. It's weird. I've had similar challenges people have described, but I want to talk about misdiagnosis. Um, I've been misdiagnosed a lot, like very recently. I went in, I had dislocated my knee, and a doctor convinced me I had arthritis. Even though I told him that I ruined my hands because I was using my hands to move myself around while my knee was healing. I said that, but he looked at my hands and said, "Oh, that's autoimmune, and you have arthritis." And I have health anxiety, so then that sent me spiraling for like a month. And then I got all these tests, found out I didn't have arthritis, and a physical therapist told me exactly what I said. I ruined my hands by overusing them. But I've also been, but that could have been solved by him listening to me. I just said I overused my hands, and he said that's not true. And I don't know why he didn't believe me, but people just don't believe me when I talk. But that's the way my best medical experiences go. As I said earlier, when I have a conversation with people, because I'm really good at problem solving and I'm really good at giving a lot of information about my experiences. And when people do that with me, things go really well. But I can think of 2 people who've done that with me. Most people don't. A few years ago, I developed functional movement disorder, and I stopped walking for like 2 years. And for 2 years, multiple neurologists convinced me that my brain was shrinking and I was dying. And then I had to meet someone. She was non-white. I think she was Hispanic, and she was a woman. And that was the difference between her and all these other doctors. They were all men. Most of them were white. And they just did not like me. And I'm realizing now that part of it's my skin color, a lot of it's my autism, and a lot of it's coming from the fact that I don't perform masculinity. And that offends a lot of male doctors. They get really offended. As soon as they meet me, they're angry. They're just angry with me. And they do not want to hear what I have to say. But it becomes a severe problem when I'm spending 2 years of my life thinking I'm going to die, and when I'm spending a month or 2 thinking I have arthritis, and I have health anxiety, so I start believing it. So just listen. As I said earlier, just listen. People, they just really need to listen and talk to people. Stop assuming that we're dumb. I'm very well educated, and I understand my experience. I know how to talk about my experiences, and I'm not. I think a lot of it seems like they think I'm lying about things, as Alex said earlier, attention seeking, and I'm not lying about things. It might look like it because I'm anxious, I'm maybe intense, but I'm not lying. Another thing is just realizing that people are often anxious, no matter if they're autistic or not, when they go to the doctor. And so we're gonna be anxious, but that doesn't mean we're not seeing our experiences appropriately. We're just anxious. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these experiences mention mirror mine, but but a big thing for me is not not understanding systems, healthcare systems. So then having to figure that stuff out, but then the communication barriers and forms. So our wiring, the autistic wiring has it gives rise to a different culture. We communicate differently than most people. But a lot of people, neurotypical people, aren't aware of that. And so yeah, there's, I don't know, just a lot of communication barriers, and like people assuming that I understand the social constructs the same way they do, gender, race, and all that. And so I get confused. A lot of them making assumptions, but then also not being able to communicate through. I prefer non-speaking communication more than anything, just because having communication with someone, especially across neurotypes, is just really exhausting in real time. So yeah, I wish email was more of a thing with doctors, and creating appointments and keeping in contact with that sort of thing.
If I may add on to that, I would just like to make a small note that regardless of how educated you are compared to the patient, you may be more informed about the broader details of whatever you're discussing than they are, but that patient is the leading expert, the world's leading expert on their own needs.
Absolutely.
So thinking about healthcare needs, a big challenge is mental health care. So through my organization, Autism Personal Coach, we provide coaching services. But in addition to the coaching, sometimes our clients, they want a therapist they want to meet with a therapist in addition, but have talked about the challenges of finding someone who understands both their autistic and LGBTQ identities. What would be some important things a therapist can do to support both of these identities for you? Start with you, Zeke.
The biggest one is not trying to undiagnose me, especially early on in knowing me. My autism diagnosis was made by an expert and has been confirmed by my previous psychologists and psychiatrists and SSI/SSDI evaluators, but every new therapist seems to want to approve or deny the diagnosis. I'm not there for an autism diagnosis, and it makes me feel invalidated when they do this. It also shows me that they won't be willing to adjust their therapy style to accommodate my autism. Same if they spend too many sessions trying to decide if I'm trans enough, which is not what I'm there for. I've been on hormones for 6 years. I'm not questioning my gender identity. I understand needing to assess, but perseverating on these things keeps us from discussing the issues I actually came for, which are not my autism diagnosis or my gender identity. I have an excellent therapist now, though.
And Alex?
I think the first thing is being willing to not only listen to me about my own experiences, but listen to autistic voices in general. Like, we are out there on the internet, we're on YouTube and Twitter, and we blog, and it's always such a relief when I don't have to explain myself to someone. And like Zeke was saying, there is like this, the first red flag for a new therapist for me is usually, they're saying, what's your past like diagnosis history or whatever? And I'm like, well, I'm autistic, I have ADHD. And sometimes it'll be like, we'll see about that. It's like, excuse me. And going hand in hand with that, if they learn about masking, that's super helpful, and learn about the cost of masking and understand that, like, probably all of us on this call, as soon as we're done, need to go like take a nap or something, because we're all going to be unbelievably exhausted, because to some extent myself, I'm masking a lot. And so knowing about that and understanding the intersexual systemic issues that are in play, and like what they tend to teach in like the textbooks even now, it is, if you're not like a cis white boy, you slip through the cracks. And I really hope that as more of us are listened to and our voices are heard, that'll be less and less. But and then the last thing for me is being trauma informed, because unfortunately a lot of us have a lot of trauma. So that's like one of the keys for me, is having someone who gets that and can help me through that.
Samantha?
I actually echo a lot of what Alex just said. I'm actually planning to address masking more on a later question. Definitely the trauma. A lot of us have gone through some very complicated history. And frankly, we're not made of stone. Something else I want to talk about is terminology and how valuable it is to sort of keep up to date on that, because there is a lot of outdated language floating around that tends to be sort of phased out because a lot of it acquires negative connotations. So when I go somewhere and I hear that sort of language being thrown around, like, I don't want to be called a transvestite. I mean, that, like, even if the person means well in using that sort of terminology, it can set off a person's fight or flight response. And in general, it's just very important to be ahead of the curve on that.
Bernard?
I think that a lot of therapists I've struggled with, it's a lot of pathologizing, a lot of like medicalizing my behavior. So then, like, I had a therapist who was great, but she was also telling me to constantly like go out and be around people and socialize and things like that. And then so I was doing that, and then it sent me into burnout. Then I sort of like disobeyed and just spent more time on my own in my apartment, just not leaving. And I started to feel a lot better. But I know that's based on like just the way she's been taught. It's just like all people need to be around people. All people need to socialize. Being inside by yourself is a sign of depression, or it's a symptom of something. Also, there just has to be a lot of re-educating on what autism, what neurodivergence is, because it's like I saw so many therapists over the years trying to get them to see my autism so that I could say that I was autistic, because I thought I had to have permission. So like 8 years, I just didn't identify as autistic. And some of that, like some therapists, like as Bennett had said earlier, one therapist said, autism, you're too smart for that, because I was getting my PhD at the time. Another therapist said, you have social skills, autism is social skills, because I don't know, we talk back and forth. I don't understand that. But then I would tell her about a lot of problems I'm having, like as teaching, being with my colleagues. I don't understand often what they're talking about. But then she wouldn't see that as me struggling socially. So yeah, I have social skills, but they're different than most people. Then like a lot of like me being direct, the way I speak is very direct. And then I notice they just get like freaked out, and they like kind of shut down sometimes. They think I'm being rude, or they think that it's a personality, like they'll drop these terms. Like I see a little bit of a personality disorder there. So just, yeah, really, if someone comes to you and says, I think I might be autistic, don't immediately say you can't be, but make a mental note and go home and start listening to autistic people talk about their experiences. Because one thing you will see a lot of is autistic people talking about their experiences with medical professionals, especially therapists. And yeah, don't be one of those people. So listen and learn, like I said earlier. Yeah. And when I talk about like non-binary, being non-binary, asexual, they'll start asking a lot, like they do this with autism too, asking a lot of questions. It's like an examination, and it's really stressful. And then I start experiencing mutism, or I just start sweating. I just can't even think anymore. So yeah, don't start examining me, but start a dialogue. You can understand what I'm saying. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so would be very helpful if medical professionals let go of whatever preconceived ideas of identity they have, because the further someone deviates from the norm, whatever idea that professional has of a norm, the more pathologized they are. So like going back to the asexual identity, I had a doctor say, what? No sex ever? I'm like, how is it? Why do you need to know that? Like when like that's a like yeah, because well, immediately I think she was trying to pathologize that instead of trying to get to know me. So yeah, identities are non-standard.
And I'm wondering, for our panelists, what ways do you see the importance of autistic people being employed or consulting with, professionals that we've already talked about in healthcare or also in educational settings? Zeke?
I think autistic people should be in every field where people work directly with autistics. We can offer expert insight from lived experience that can't be found in a textbook.
Yeah.
Samantha?
I think from a more general infrastructure perspective, I think the communication piece that I discussed earlier is a big one, because a lot of us here don't do well with phone calls and prefer email. Having autism is not the only reason a person could be like that. They might have dysphoria from their voice, they could just be introverted, or they might just be straight up mute. I have run into a lot of sort of scenarios where like people have told me, oh, we cannot do email, and it just brings to mind, like, what if I was literally unable to speak? The other thing is clarifying why I need to email is a source of stress, because that oftentimes that involves clarifying over the phone, and it requires advocacy skills that a lot of people have not developed. So it's just generally important to leave that avenue open for everyone to reduce as much stress as possible for as many people as possible.
Alex?
Yeah, I think ultimately assumptions don't help anybody. They don't help professionals and they don't help us. And we might not have all the answers or anything, but we have suggestions and we can speak to our own experience. So like, why guess? Why guess when we're willing to tell you? And I can see how it could be really frustrating to like go through all this training and learn something one way, and then it's always changing and all that. But that lived experience of always having to correct people and always needing to pick your battles about who you correct, and not only being autistic, but LGBTQ plus, like, it's just exhausting. So like, we have creative insights that could help both of us. We want to communicate, we want things to be smoother. So it would be easier for all of us if we were better included.
I also think, to add on to that, I think that if you're making a constant effort to keep ahead of the research and stay on that curve, that the sort of shifts in thinking won't be so drastic, because a lot of times they accumulate in little ways over time. Like in the little they only become like big shifts in thinking when you kind of zoom out, or when you jump into it after years of thinking one way and you see, oh, all of this research from the past 5 years has actually said this. I think that if you've been paying attention that whole time, you won't get caught off guard by that.
Bernard?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe there's autistic people in these roles. I just don't believe that they're necessarily open about their neurodivergence, or not all of them know that they're autistic. But I believe that having consultants who are autists, it would really speed up the learning process for a lot of these professionals. And I think it would, because I mean, the best place to learn about autism is from autistic people, but it's also, especially in this country, people are afraid to admit when they don't know something, especially when they're on the job, and especially when they have what's considered a professional role. But I think that medical professionals would be more willing to admit they don't know something if they had a consultant to go to. And if someone is a medical professional and they found out they're autistic, I know that they might be afraid to come out, but they could really help the autistic patients not just their patients, but all the patients that come into their practice, because they can relay all kinds of information to other people who work in the practice. And it also shifts the, because this is a workplace, these are workplaces, so it shifts the work culture from one that thinks of a deficit lens, which is really just passing on ableism, practicing ableism. It changes it into a more accepting environment that's more accepting of, I think when you become more accepting of one marginalized group, especially if it's autistic people, if you become more accepting of autistic people, you can start to see people opening up their minds, dropping their assumptions about people of color and trans people, and just everyone, immigrants. I just really think it would just change the entire workplace, which really affects society. And it just makes a lot of people feel more comfortable coming in there as patients. And then, yeah, it just opens up a sense of belonging for everyone. But yeah, and also, but the main thing is really speeding up the learning. I think a lot of the medical community is very behind on what autism is and what we know. And it's always surprised me, like I'll see something. Did you know this, like some of the double empathy problem? It's a new theory that explains autistic people don't have deficits, they can communicate with each other, but that's not new. And so you're just behind. So yeah.
Yeah, so as far as representation in these fields, it's essential to our survival as autistic people, but but neurodiversity is essential to survival. So we already do have autistic people in every field, as like autistic people have coexisted with neurotypical people for thousands of years, and nothing has moved forward without autistic people. But there has been a lot of silencing in favor of neurotypical culture, even though neurotypicals aren't necessarily aware that they're doing that. And then just also people afraid to identify as autistic, working in these roles. So so I think so yeah, it's important that people are in these roles, but more importantly, it's I think it's important, the acceptance is important, so that people can feel comfortable coming out and being open with these identities as professionals, and of course this is just makes it much easier for the people that they're interacting with to come out and be open.
Yeah.
Now, I've loved you sharing your expertise and personal experiences with us today. As we bring the event to a close, can you share maybe any additional way that you can be better supported by professionals? Zeke?
I made a list of 5. Be quick.
1. Using my pronouns, even in the halls or behind the desk. I can hear you. 2. Allowing me to hand you written notes and communicate on my part outside of appointments because I have trouble getting my thoughts out in real time. 3 and 4. Pausing between things you say and making it clear when you're changing topics, but using fully adult language with me. This one varies between autistic people, but this is what I need personally. 5. Sometimes I offer my long-term doctors in autism accommodations report that states what makes appointments go more smoothly for me and things I cannot do, like use the phone. It's helpful when they have time to read it at some point in my care.
Alex?
Yeah, I think rather than needing to like shout to be heard, I'd love to be asked and collaborate in my care, be a partner in caring for my body and my mind. You know, we're out here and a lot of us want to be included to give input. So if we want that bridge, as you know, the name of the panel, we need the bridge to go between both of the sides. So really what I want is participation and active listening.
Thanks for including part of the name of the event in your answer, Alex. I like that. Samantha?
I wanted to double down on some of the topics around masking that were discussed earlier. Actually, a lot of what I had planned to say was discussed earlier. So I kind of wanted to wrap it up a little bit. To elaborate, masking is essentially picking up and imitating neurotypical behaviors, or really just typical behaviors in general, but in this specific instance, neurotypical behaviors. It's a very common coping mechanism, and it's also very frequently it's commonly used by neurotypicals as well, and a lot of therapies encourage it. But it does induce a lot of stress, and me personally, I've had it impact the supports that I need. I have had a lot of people assume like things about me, like Zeke. Zay mentioned being labeled as high functioning and low functioning in varying situations. I've been labeled high functioning quite a bit, and because of that, people assume that I don't need support in a lot of instances, when a lot of times I very much do. And kind of fighting against that, advocating for myself and saying, yes, I do need this, goes against my masking, because essentially like that, rocking boat like that is socially risky, and masking in general is about mitigating social risk. I in general, I think that just being more aware of how masking works, like what kind of stress it causes and like what it looks like, is very important, because a lot of autistic people hide behind masking. And I personally have kind of had to, I've spent years learning how to mask, only for people to tell me that I don't fit into a certain image of what they think autism should look like. And then I've kind of spent more years still kind of unlearning how to mask, and both ways have caused a lot of stress. So yeah, I think that learning about masking and also trying to find ways to cope with autism that don't encourage masking, those are very important to me.
Bernard?
Yeah, so yeah, the main thing I was thinking about is that just keeping in mind that when patients come to you, when students come to you, it's a collaborative project. Like therapy is a collaborative project where you're working together with the patient with their mind. When you're teaching, I taught higher education for 5 years. It's like I knew more than the students, but I'm still collaborating with them to work on this project that is their their writing, is this assignments they need to turn in. But even also in a medical setting, as I said earlier, the best primary care I had was someone who he really just sat down and talked with me, wanted to learn about everything I was going through that led up to whatever I was coming in there for. Like I have cramps in my hand, and I don't know why. We can never figure it out. But he was willing to listen to me instead of just putting some kind of diagnosis on there. So you're working together. You're not there to teach them who they are, especially who they are. Ask people how they identify and stick to that. And also, I've noticed too that there's a lot of assumptions that I don't understand when they're like talking about me. Like when two doctors are talking about me, or when they're making fun of me. Like I had two neurologists who were in the same room during it, and they thought I couldn't hear them, or I didn't notice. But I have sensory awareness. I can hear everything, and I'm very good at watching people because I grew up with social anxiety. So I'm very good at knowing who's around me. so I can hide from that person. And I don't really do that anymore, but I'm just very good at it, tuning into other people's behaviors. I'm very good at reading behaviors. Yeah, treat them like people, and don't even like don't try to pretend with me, because I can tell when people are pretending with me. I can tell when people are condescending, when they're talking to me like I'm 10 years old. And that's not helpful. It just makes me want to leave. And I start shutting down. I don't respond to them. I don't want to give them any information. I just want to go home. And I start doing whatever I can to get out of that appointment. And then it's not even helpful for any of us. So just treat us all like real people. And that a lot of anger I experience when I go in doctor's appointments. And it's a lot of things. It's racism, it's ableism, whatever it is. I can see it. And so I just want professionals to know that I can see all that anger, and it doesn't help at all. So
Renee?
The only thing I have to add is to ask people what they need and listen to them without the intent to correct them or change them.
All right.
Yeah.
Can
Well-
I add something quick?
Go ahead, Zeke.
Yes.
It's just that like a lot of us are the master of masking for Zoom appointments already. So like below my waist has not stopped moving. I've been kicking and shaking my legs the whole time. I've
been
had this
bouncing
many
my,
toys to get through this
yeah,
thing. But like
I'm
we can
tearing
do
through a
it.
sock right now.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to point that out. Like we can sit here
Yeah.
and talk to medical professionals on an appointment and look completely still and focused while doing 15 STEM things to regulate.
Yeah, I've been bouncing my leg as well.
yeah, me too.
And go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Zeke. And thanks again to all of you that have joined and listened into this conversation. And a very special thank you to our 5 panelists. Your time, energy, spoons, and valuable expertise are greatly appreciated. And also a reminder for everyone that is listening to the event or registered that you'll be emailed a survey after this event in the next couple of days. And while we weren't taking questions now, you could ask questions and we will do our best to answer those. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
You as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.